What if the person who promised to love you forever stood in front of everyone you knew and destroyed you with a single sentence? Maya Cole never saw it coming, and neither will you. Picture this. The Cole family estate on a cold October evening, where the air itself seems to cost money and every chandelier holds more value than most people's homes. Sebastian Cole had called a full family meeting, something he rarely did, and Maya thought maybe, just maybe, he was finally going to integrate her more fully into his world. She'd been married to this man for 7 years, loved him through his late nights and cold silences, believed in the person he could be beneath that frozen exterior. The grand hall buzzed with tension as family members gathered, their designer clothes rustling like currency, their eyes judging everything and everyone. Victoria Cole sat at the head of the long mahogany table like a queen on her throne, her diamonds catching the light as she assessed Maya with those ice-chip eyes that had never warmed to her daughter-in-law. Richard Cole stood by the fireplace, brandy in hand, radiating the kind of power that came from decades of getting exactly what he wanted, no matter who got crushed in the process. Nathaniel lounged in his chair with that smirk he always wore around Maya, the one that said she'd never truly belong in this world of private jets and political connections. Sebastian entered last, and Maya's heart did that stupid flutter it always did when she saw him, even after all these years. Even after all the ways he'd slowly frozen her out of his life. He didn't look at her as he took his position at the head of the table, and that should have been her first warning. Sebastian was nothing if not deliberate, nothing if not calculated in every gesture and word. When he finally spoke, his voice carried that boardroom authority that made investors tremble and competitors fold. "I've gathered you all here tonight to make an announcement that affects the future of our family and our legacy," he began, and Maya felt her stomach tighten with a feeling she couldn't name yet, something dark creeping up her spine like ice water. She told herself it was nothing, that maybe he was announcing a new business venture, maybe a charitable foundation they'd run together. God, she was so naive. Sebastian's eyes swept the room, touching everyone except her, and when he finally spoke again, the words came out precise and brutal as a surgeon's knife. Effective immediately, I am filing for divorce from Maya. She no longer fits the future vision of this family, and it's time we all moved forward without the complications her presence has created. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of absence of sound that happens when reality itself breaks. Maya felt every eye in the room turn to her, felt the heat of humiliation crawl up her neck like a living thing, felt 7 years of marriage disintegrate in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask how the man who'd whispered promises in the dark could stand there and erase her like a line item in a budget report. But Maya had learned something in 7 years of navigating the Cole family's treacherous waters. She had learned dignity, and sometimes dignity was the only weapon left when everything else had been stripped away. She stood slowly, and the scrape of her chair against the marble floor sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Maya looked directly at Sebastian for the first time since his announcement, and what she saw in those gray eyes broke something inside her that had been holding out hope that this was some kind of nightmare she'd wake up from. There was nothing there, no regret, no emotion, just the blank slate of a man who'd made a business decision and moved on. "I see," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she'd imagined possible, clear and strong in a way that made Victoria's eyebrows raise slightly. "Then I suppose there's nothing more to discuss. I'll have my lawyer contact yours in the morning." She walked out of that room with her head high, her steps measured and calm, and didn't let herself run until she'd cleared the front door and the cold October air hit her face like a slap. Behind her, she could hear the family already moving on, their voices rising in discussion as if she'd never existed, as if 7 years of her life hadn't just been incinerated in front of an audience. Maya made it to her car before the first sob broke through, made it out of the driveway before the tears came in earnest, made it exactly 3 miles down the dark country road before she had to pull over and let the reality crash through her like a tidal wave. Sebastian Cole had just destroyed her in front of his entire family, had humiliated her with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly, and she had absolutely no idea why. But here's what Maya didn't know, what none of them knew as they sat in that grand hall discussing her departure like she was a failed investment. Sebastian Cole had just made the biggest sacrifice of his life, and the biggest mistake. Because the woman he'd just thrown away to save was about to become the one person who could destroy everything he'd ever built. 3 days after the meeting that destroyed her world, Maya sat in Marcus Webb's office and stared at the divorce papers that would officially end her marriage. Marcus had been her mentor back when she'd worked as a consultant before Sebastian swept her into his glittering, suffocating world, and he was the only person she'd trusted to call when everything fell apart. He'd agreed to represent her immediately, and now he watched her with those kind, worried eyes as she held a pen over the signature line. "You don't have to do this today," Marcus said gently, pushing his glasses up his nose in that gesture she remembered from years ago when he'd taught her to trust her instincts. "We can fight this, Maya. We can demand answers, demand a proper settlement. You've been married 7 years to one of the wealthiest men in the country. You're entitled to protection." But Maya just shook her head, her hand steady as she signed her name in swift, angry strokes across the bottom of each page. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights replaying that scene in the coal estate, trying to understand what she'd done wrong, what had changed, why Sebastian had looked at her with such cold emptiness. And she'd come to a conclusion that hardened something inside her chest. She was done begging for explanations from people who'd never valued her in the first place. "I don't want his money," she said, her voice flat with the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than physical tiredness. "I don't want anything that ties me to that family ever again. I just want out, Marcus. I want to forget the Cole name and everything it represents." Marcus studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing whether to push harder, whether to force her to fight for what she deserved. But whatever he saw in her eyes must have convinced him, because he just nodded and gathered the papers. "Then it's done," he said quietly. "But Maya, I need you to promise me something. If anything comes up, anything at all that seems wrong about this divorce, you call me immediately. Sebastian Cole doesn't do anything without a reason, and men like him don't just throw away 7 years of marriage on a whim." She wanted to laugh at that, wanted to tell Marcus that he was wrong, that Sebastian had proven himself exactly as cold and calculating as everyone had always whispered he was. But something in Marcus's tone made her pause, made her look up and meet his eyes. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying I've been practicing law for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of divorces from powerful families. Most of them are messy, drawn-out battles over money and assets and reputation. This," he tapped the papers, "this is too clean, too fast. Sebastian's lawyers haven't fought a single point. They didn't even try to include a non-disclosure agreement, which is basically unheard of at his level. It's like he wants you gone as quickly and completely as possible, and not because he hates you." Maya felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Then why?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "That's what worries me. Because in my experience, when powerful men move this fast to cut someone loose, it's usually because they're trying to protect them from something, or protect themselves from the damage that person could do." Maya left Marcus's office with those words echoing in her head, the signed divorce papers in her briefcase feeling heavier than they should. The October rain had started, cold and insistent, and she walked through the Manhattan streets without an umbrella, letting the water soak through her coat because physical discomfort was easier to process than the emotional devastation. She'd moved out of the penthouse she'd shared with Sebastian the day after the meeting, taken only her personal belongings and left behind everything he'd ever given her, every piece of jewelry, every designer dress, every artifact of their life together. She was staying in a modest hotel in Brooklyn, the kind of place that reminded her of her life before Sebastian, before she'd been stupid enough to believe that love could bridge the gap between their worlds. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't want to read, calls from people who'd heard about the divorce and wanted either to gloat or to get gossip, and she'd stopped answering after the first dozen. But as she walked, something Marcus said kept circling back, kept nagging at the edges of her consciousness. Sebastian's lawyers hadn't fought anything, hadn't tried to control the narrative or protect his reputation. For a man who controlled every detail of his public image, who'd built an empire on calculated precision, that was completely out of character. What was he protecting her from? Or what was he protecting himself from? The questions followed her all the way back to her hotel room, and as Maya stood in front of the mirror taking off her soaked coat, she made herself a promise. She wasn't going to just disappear quietly into whatever life Sebastian had decided she should have. She was going to find out why he'd destroyed their marriage so publicly, so cruelly, and if there was something darker behind his decision, she was going to drag it into the light. Maya opened her laptop and started searching, typing Sebastian Cole and Cole Technologies into every search engine and news aggregator she could find. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the standard coverage of tech industry moves, stock prices, product launches. But then, buried in a financial blog she'd never heard of, she found a small article dated 2 weeks before the family meeting. Just 3 paragraphs that made her blood run cold. Federal investigators have reportedly opened an inquiry into Cole Technologies and its affiliated family holdings, focusing on potential financial irregularities and shell company operations. Sources close to the investigation suggest the probe may expand to include family members and associated persons. A spokesperson for Cole Technologies declined to comment. Maya read the article 3 times, her heart pounding harder with each pass. Federal investigation. Financial irregularities. Associated persons. And suddenly, like a puzzle piece clicking into place, she understood. Sebastian hadn't divorced her because she didn't fit his future. He divorced her to cut her loose before the walls came crashing down. Maya spent the next week becoming an investigator in her own life. She'd put some of her things in storage when she moved into Sebastian's penthouse years ago, boxes of old work files and documents she'd never thought she'd need again, and now she tore through them with the desperate energy of someone who'd been blind and finally found a light. Marcus had tried to tell her to let it go, to move forward with her life, but Maya couldn't. Something had been nagging at her since she'd found that article, a memory she couldn't quite place, a conversation she'd half forgotten. In the 3rd box she opened, buried under old consulting reports and tax returns, she found what she was looking for, a manila folder with Cole Family Trust beneficiary documents printed on the tab. Her hands shook as she opened it, and there, on page after page of legal language she barely understood, was her name. Maya Reeves Cole, listed as a beneficiary and legal signatory on multiple accounts and corporate entities she'd never heard of. She remembered signing these papers now, remembered Sebastian bringing them to her 3 years ago, explaining them as simple estate planning, protecting her future if anything happened to him. "It's just standard procedure for families like ours," he'd said, his gray eyes sincere, his hand warm on her shoulder. "I want to make sure you're taken care of, that you have legal standing in the family holdings." She'd trusted him completely, had signed where he told her to sign because she'd loved him and believed he loved her back. God, she'd been such an idiot. Maya photographed every page with her phone, her mind racing as she started to see the pattern. The accounts were all offshore, the corporate entities all registered in tax havens, and her name appeared again and again as someone with legal authority and fiduciary responsibility. If federal investigators were looking at the Cole family's financial operations, they weren't just looking at Sebastian. They were looking at everyone whose name appeared on these documents, and Maya's name was everywhere. He hadn't protected her by divorcing her. He'd used her as a shield for years, and then when the heat got too close, he'd cut her loose and hoped the investigators wouldn't connect the dots. The betrayal of it hit her like a physical blow, made her sit down hard on the concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of her own naive complicity. Sebastian had never loved her, not really. He'd married a woman from outside his world, someone without connections or sophistication, someone he could manipulate into signing documents she didn't understand. And when that strategy became a liability, he'd thrown her away with the same cold calculation he'd probably used to fire an underperforming employee. Maya called Marcus immediately, and when he answered, she didn't even let him greet her. "I was a legal shield," she said, her voice tight with controlled rage. "The whole marriage, Marcus. He married me to use me as a fall guy for whatever illegal operations the Cole family was running. And when the investigation started, he divorced me to make it look like I was the rogue element they'd already cut out." There was a long pause on Marcus's end, and she could hear him moving, probably going somewhere he could talk privately. "Maya, are you sure? That's a serious accusation." "I'm looking at the documents right now," she said, photographing another page with her free hand. "My signature is on financial instruments I never understood, corporate entities I never knew existed. I'm sending you everything. If the feds come after the Cole family, my name is going to be all over their evidence, and Sebastian made sure of that years ago." Marcus swore, which was so unlike him that Maya actually felt a grim satisfaction. At least someone else was finally seeing what she was seeing, finally understanding the full scope of the betrayal. "Okay," he said, and she could hear the lawyer taking over his voice, becoming crisp and professional. "Don't touch anything else. I'm sending someone to photograph everything in that storage unit right now. We need a complete record, and we need it documented by a professional. Maya, this changes everything. If you can prove Sebastian knowingly used you as a shield in criminal financial operations, you're not just a victim of a bad divorce, you're a victim of conspiracy and fraud. But there's something else, Marcus continued, and his voice took on a tone that made Maya's stomach clench. If you were deliberately placed in these positions without full knowledge, and if Sebastian divorced you specifically to protect himself while leaving you exposed, then he committed fraud against you personally. But Maya, here's the thing you need to understand. If the federal investigation is as serious as that article suggested, Sebastian's move might have actually saved you. By publicly divorcing you and severing all ties before charges were filed, he created reasonable doubt that you were truly involved in whatever the family was doing. Maya felt her anger deflate slightly, confusion rushing in to replace it. So he was protecting me? Maybe, Marcus said carefully. Or maybe he was protecting himself, and you happened to benefit from the timing. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? Because once we start down this road, once we bring these documents to the attention of investigators, there's no going back. The Cole family will come at you with everything they have, and Sebastian will be forced to choose between protecting himself and protecting you. Maya looked around at the scattered evidence of her dismantled life, at the papers that proved she'd been used and manipulated by the man she'd loved. She thought about that cold look in Sebastian's eyes during the family meeting, the way he'd erased 7 years of marriage like deleting a file. And she made her decision. I want the truth, she said. All of it. And I want the Cole family to pay for what they've done. Not just to me, but to everyone they've used and discarded. The federal investigation that Sebastian had tried so desperately to prevent exploded into public view exactly 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Maya watched it unfold on the news from her Brooklyn hotel room, watched federal agents emerge from Cole Technologies headquarters carrying boxes of evidence, watched reporters swarm like sharks smelling blood in the water. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, Billionaire Tech CEO under investigation for financial fraud. And Maya felt a strange mixture of vindication and something darker she couldn't quite name. Sebastian's face appeared on screen, a carefully controlled press statement delivered outside his office building. And even through the television, she could see the cracks in his usual perfect composure. Cole Technologies categorically denies any wrongdoing, he said, his voice steady, but his gray eyes betraying something Maya had never seen there before, fear. We are cooperating fully with investigators and are confident that this inquiry will demonstrate the integrity of our business practices. But the news anchors weren't buying it, and neither was anyone else. Within hours, financial analysts were appearing on every channel, dissecting the Cole family's business empire and finding connections that looked increasingly criminal. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, offshore accounts that moved money through 3 countries before landing in legitimate businesses, investment schemes that seemed designed specifically to avoid taxation and regulation. And buried in every report, mentioned in every article, was one consistent detail that made Maya's blood boil. Investigators are also looking into Maya Reeves Cole, the billionaire's recently divorced wife, who appeared as a signatory on multiple questionable financial instruments. She'd been right. The divorce hadn't protected her at all. Sebastian had cut her loose, but her name was still attached to every piece of evidence the federal investigators were examining. Marcus had filed emergency motions, immediately, demanding that Maya be recognized as a victim rather than a suspect, but the court of public opinion moved faster than the legal system. Within days, Maya's face was appearing on news broadcasts, old photos from charity events and company functions, with headlines asking, "Who is the woman behind the Cole scandal?" Her phone exploded with calls from reporters, lawyers offering representation, and more disturbing, threats from people who'd decided she was guilty before any charges had even been filed. She changed hotels 3 times in 1 week, stopped using her credit cards because the transactions could be traced, and started wearing sunglasses and hats whenever she left her room. This was what Sebastian had wanted to protect her from, she realized. This public crucifixion, this trial by media, this total destruction of privacy and safety. But what he'd failed to account for was that Maya wasn't the naive, trusting woman he'd married anymore. She'd spent every night since finding those documents studying financial law, corporate structures, and fraud prosecution with an intensity that would have impressed her old consulting firm. Marcus had tried to shield her, but Maya insisted on being involved in every decision, every filing, every strategy session. And slowly, as she learned the language of white-collar crime and financial manipulation, she started to see something that nobody else had noticed yet. The pattern of evidence the feds had gathered pointed to orchestration by someone who understood the system intimately, someone who'd been documenting everything for years. The Cole family hadn't just been running illegal operations, they'd been carefully recording every transaction, keeping meticulous records that would have been smarter to destroy. Unless someone had been planning for this moment, preparing for the day when the whole empire would need to come down. "Marcus," Maya said during one of their late-night strategy sessions, her eyes bright with sudden understanding. "What if Sebastian wanted the investigation to happen?" Her lawyer looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "That's insane. Why would anyone deliberately bring federal prosecutors down on their own family?" "Because he knew they were guilty," Maya said, her voice gaining confidence as the theory solidified in her mind. "Think about it, Marcus. Sebastian's relationship with his family has always been complicated. Victoria and Richard built the empire on practices Sebastian never agreed with. But he was trapped by loyalty and legacy. What if he's been gathering evidence against them for years? And what if he needed someone on the inside, someone with legal standing who could testify credibly?" "You," Marcus said, but his tone had shifted from skeptical to considering. "But Maya, he divorced you. He humiliated you publicly." "Exactly," Maya said, and now she was pacing, her mind racing faster than her words. "He divorced me so dramatically that nobody would ever suspect we were working together. He made me look like a victim, which I am, but also like someone who might have information that could be valuable to investigators. And more importantly, he gave me a reason to hate the Cole family enough to cooperate against them." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the whiteboard she'd created with its web of connections and transactions. "That's either brilliant or completely insane," he finally said. "The problem is, if you're right, Sebastian's playing the most dangerous game imaginable. He's not just risking his own freedom. He's betting that you'll eventually figure out what he's done and decide to help him bring down his own family." Maya stared at the whiteboard, at her own name appearing again and again in the evidence trail. "Or maybe he's counting on me to be angry enough to destroy everyone, including him," she said quietly. "Maybe this isn't about justice at all. Maybe it's about revenge, and I'm just the weapon he pointed at the people who created him." The Cole family didn't crumble under federal investigation. They regrouped and they attacked, and their first target was exactly who Maya expected it to be. Her. Victoria Cole appeared on a primetime news interview 3 weeks into the scandal, dressed in elegant white as if she were the victim, her silver blonde hair perfect, her cold blue eyes glistening with manufactured tears. Maya watched from her latest hotel room, her stomach churning with rage as Sebastian's mother delivered a performance worthy of an Oscar. "We welcomed Maya into our family with open hearts," Victoria said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "We never suspected that behind her sweet, modest demeanor was someone capable of such betrayal. She had access to all our financial documents, to Sebastian's complete trust, and she used that access to orchestrate schemes we're only now beginning to understand the full scope of." The interviewer, a serious woman with sharp questions, leaned forward with calculated sympathy. "Mrs. Cole, are you suggesting that your former daughter-in-law was the mastermind behind the financial fraud your family is being investigated for?" And Victoria, that manipulative witch, dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief and nodded. "I'm suggesting that federal investigators need to look very carefully at who had the most to gain from these arrangements, and who conveniently divorced my son just before the investigation became public." Maya Reeves was a consultant who specialized in corporate financial structures before she married Sebastian. She had the knowledge, the access, and apparently, the moral flexibility to do this. Maya's phone exploded immediately after the interview aired, Marcus calling within seconds. "Do not respond," he said before she could even speak. "Do not make any statements. Do not go on social media. Do not do anything that could be used against you in court. This is a calculated move to shift blame, and we need to respond strategically, not emotionally." But Maya barely heard him because her attention was caught by another news alert flashing across her phone's screen. Sebastian Cole releases statement supporting mother's allegations. Her hands shook as she opened the article and read Sebastian's carefully worded statement, delivered through his lawyers. "While I maintained hope for my marriage until recently, it has become clear that Maya's involvement in my family's business affairs was far more extensive and intentional than I understood at the time. I am cooperating fully with investigators to determine the extent of any schemes she may have orchestrated. He'd thrown her to the wolves. After everything, after the evidence she'd found showing he'd deliberately put her name on those documents, Sebastian was now claiming she'd been the mastermind. The betrayal was so complete, so perfect in its cruelty, that Maya actually laughed, a harsh sound in the empty hotel room. She called Marcus back. "They're setting me up to take the fall for everything," she said, her voice deadly calm. "Sebastian's family is going to claim I manipulated their innocent billionaire son, that I used my consulting background to create financial schemes, and that I divorced him right before the investigation because I knew it was coming. They're making me the mastermind so they can all walk away clean." "I know," Marcus said, and she could hear the anger in his voice too. "It's a classic defense strategy in white-collar cases. Find a scapegoat and pile everything on them. The problem is, Maya, your signature is all over those documents, and you don't have evidence that Sebastian forced you to sign them. It's your word against his, and he's a billionaire with unlimited resources for lawyers." "Then we need to get evidence," Maya said, an idea forming in her mind that was probably crazy, but might be the only option left. "We need proof that I was set up, and there's only one place that proof exists, inside the Cole family's own records." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Sebastian kept meticulous records of everything. You said so yourself. The feds have financial documents, but they don't have the personal communications, the emails, the memos that would show I was manipulated into signing those papers. That evidence is either in Sebastian's home office or on his personal servers." "Maya, you can't be serious," Marcus said, his voice rising. "That's breaking and entering. That's exactly what the Cole family wants, evidence that you were willing to commit crimes. If you get caught—" "I won't get caught," Maya interrupted, and she was surprised by how calm she felt, how clear her thinking had become. "I lived in that penthouse for 7 years. I know the security systems, the doorman schedules, the backup codes Sebastian thought I'd forgotten. I have a right to retrieve my personal property, and if I happen to find evidence that I was used as a legal shield while I'm there, well, that's just fortunate timing. As your lawyer, I'm advising you not to do this," Marcus said firmly. "As your friend, I'm telling you it's too dangerous. The Coles are clearly willing to destroy you to protect themselves. If you give them ammunition by doing something illegal—" "They've already destroyed me," Maya said quietly. "My name is all over the news as a suspected criminal. I can't get a job, can't use my own credit cards without reporters tracking me down, can't walk down the street without people recognizing me as the woman who allegedly defrauded a billionaire family. I have nothing left to lose, Marcus, which makes me more dangerous than they realize." She could hear Marcus breathing on the other end, could imagine him pushing his glasses up his nose, weighing the ethics against the necessity. "If you do this," he finally said, "and that's a hypothetical if, not legal advice, you document everything. You photograph every piece of evidence with timestamp metadata. You don't take anything that isn't explicitly yours, and you get out at the first sign of trouble. And Maya, you make sure you're not doing this for revenge. You make sure you're doing it because it's the only way to prove your innocence." Maya looked at her reflection in the dark hotel window, at the woman she'd become since that family meeting destroyed her life. "Maybe it's both," she said. "Maybe I deserve a little revenge along with my vindication." At 2 a.m. on a Thursday, Maya stood across the street from the penthouse building she'd called home for 7 years and tried to remember how to breathe. She'd planned this for 3 days, memorizing the security guard rotation schedules, timing the doorman's bathroom breaks, reviewing the building's camera blind spots. Marcus didn't know she was doing this tonight. She'd stopped answering his calls after their last argument about the legality of her plan, because she knew he'd try to stop her, and she couldn't afford to be stopped. Everything she'd lost, everything she'd been, everything she might still become hinged on what she found in that penthouse. The baseball cap hid her face from the street cameras, and the dark clothes made her just another New Yorker moving through the expensive neighborhood in the dead hours when even the city briefly sleeps. She crossed the street during a gap in traffic and approached the service entrance she'd used countless times when bringing home groceries or avoiding paparazzi during her marriage. The code was probably changed, she'd expected that, but when she tried it anyway, her heart nearly stopped as the lock clicked open. Sebastian hadn't changed it, which meant either he was the worst security-conscious billionaire in history, or he'd left it accessible on purpose. Maya took the service elevator up to the penthouse level, her heart hammering so loud she was sure someone would hear it. The elevator opened into a private hallway she'd walked 1,000 times, but tonight it felt alien, dangerous, like entering enemy territory. The penthouse door had a keypad lock and a biometric scanner, and this was the real test. She pressed her thumb to the scanner, half expecting an alarm to sound, security to come running, her entire plan to collapse. But the lock disengaged with a soft click, and the door opened into darkness. He'd left her biometric signature active. Sebastian had divorced her, humiliated her, accused her publicly of being a criminal mastermind, but he'd left her access to his home intact, which meant he'd known she would come. Maya stood in the doorway of the penthouse, every instinct screaming that this was a trap, that she should turn around and leave, that nothing good could come from walking into a situation this obviously staged. But then she thought about her face on every news channel, about Victoria's crocodile tears, about Sebastian's cold statement throwing her under the bus, and she stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The penthouse was exactly as she'd left it, which somehow made it worse. She'd expected Sebastian to have erased her, changed the furniture, removed any trace that she'd ever lived here, but everything was the same. The couch where they'd watched movies on rare, quiet nights. The kitchen where she'd tried to cook him birthday dinners. The hallway leading to the bedroom they'd shared until his coldness had driven her to sleep in the guest room more nights than not. Maya forced herself to focus. She wasn't here for nostalgia or closure, she was here for evidence. Sebastian's home office was at the end of the hall, a room she'd rarely been allowed in during their marriage because it contained sensitive business materials. She'd accepted that boundary like she'd accepted so many others, trusting that his need for privacy in his work didn't mean he was hiding anything from her personally. God, she'd been naive. The office door was unlocked, and when Maya pushed it open, she found herself in a space that looked more like a command center than a workspace. Multiple monitors, filing cabinets, a massive desk with organized stacks of documents. And sitting in the center of the desk, illuminated by a small desk lamp that had been left on, was a manila folder with her name written on it in Sebastian's precise handwriting. For Maya. Maya's hands shook as she picked up the folder. This was absolutely a trap. There was no question anymore. Sebastian had known she would come, had left her access active, had prepared this folder specifically for her to find. The question was whether the trap was designed to incriminate her further or to give her the truth she'd been searching for. She opened the folder. Inside were documents, dozens of them, meticulously organized with colored tabs and handwritten notes in the margins. At first, Maya couldn't process what she was looking at, her mind refusing to accept the implications. But as she read through page after page, the full picture began to emerge, and it was so much bigger and darker than she'd imagined. Sebastian had been documenting his family's crimes for 5 years, since before he'd even married Maya. Email printouts showing Victoria orchestrating offshore account transfers, memo records of Richard pressuring executives to falsify financial reports, text message screenshots of Nathaniel threatening whistleblowers. Every member of the Cole family was represented in the evidence, their crimes laid out in methodical, prosecutorial detail. And in a separate section with a red tab, Maya found documents about herself. Her signature on the legal papers, yes, but also Sebastian's handwritten notes dated months before he'd ever asked her to sign them. Need clean legal signatory outside family network. Maya perfect candidate, no corporate background to raise flags, complete trust makes cooperation guaranteed. He'd planned it from the beginning. The romance, the marriage, the careful manipulation of her signing documents she didn't understand, all of it had been a setup. Not to frame her for crimes, but to create a credible witness who could eventually testify against his family. Sebastian hadn't loved her, he'd recruited her, and she'd been too flattered by a billionaire's attention to see it. But the folder contained something else, a letter paper clipped to the inside back cover, written in Sebastian's handwriting. Maya, if you're reading this, it means I failed to protect you the way I'd planned. I know you think I used you, and you're right. I did. I married you because I needed someone outside the family's corruption, someone I could trust to be exactly who they appeared to be, someone whose innocence would be obvious even under federal scrutiny. But what started as strategy became the only real thing in my life. I fell in love with you, truly, and when I realized the investigation was coming, I had 2 choices. Tell you the truth and make you complicit in my plan to destroy my family, or cut you loose and hope you'd stay safe. I chose wrong. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. This folder contains Everything federal prosecutors need to convict my family. It also contains evidence that you were manipulated and used without your knowledge, which should clear you of any suspicion. I've left copies in 3 other locations, insurance that even if something happens to me, the truth comes out. I'm asking you now for something I have no right to ask. Help me finish this. Not for me, but for everyone else the Cole family will destroy if they're allowed to continue. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but maybe I can earn your partnership in bringing them down. The choice is yours. It always should have been. Maya's first instinct was to run, but the figure in the doorway was between her and the exit, and her mind raced through options. The fire escape on the bedroom terrace, the service elevator she'd used to come up, screaming for help though nobody would believe she had a right to be here. But then the figure reached for the light switch, and the hallway flooded with brightness, and Maya found herself staring at Sebastian Cole. He looked terrible, which gave her a vicious satisfaction she wasn't proud of. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive coat wrinkled like he'd been sleeping in his office, and those gray eyes that had always been so controlled were raw with something that looked like desperation. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice rough like he hadn't slept in days. "I've been waiting here every night for a week, hoping you'd realize the truth and come looking for answers." Maya gripped the folder tighter, anger flooding through her with enough force that her hands shook. "You son of a bitch," she said, her voice low and deadly. "You planned everything. The marriage, the manipulation, using me as your personal insurance policy against your family. And then when it got too dangerous, you threw me to the wolves and let them paint me as a criminal on national television." Sebastian flinched at her words, actually flinched, and Maya felt a surge of power at seeing him react to her for once instead of maintaining that infuriating control. "You're right," he said, and his admission shocked her into silence. "I used you. I married you because I needed someone outside my family's corruption, someone whose innocence would be obvious to any investigation. I'm not going to insult you by pretending otherwise or making excuses. But Maya, I need you to understand something." He took a step closer, and Maya stepped back instinctively, the folder pressed against her chest like armor. "Don't," she warned. "Don't come closer, don't touch me, don't give me some speech about how you were protecting me. I read your letter, Sebastian. I know you claim you fell in love with me, but you'll forgive me if I don't believe anything that comes out of your mouth anymore." "I don't expect you to believe me," Sebastian said, stopping where he was. "I destroyed any right to your trust when I made that announcement at the family meeting. But the letter is true, Maya. What started as a calculated move became real somewhere along the way, and I was too much of a coward to tell you the truth when I should have. So I made the worst choice possible. I cut you out without explanation and let my family make you their scapegoat." Maya stared out at the Manhattan skyline, at the city that had witnessed her rise into Sebastian's world and her dramatic fall from it. "Your mother went on television and called me a criminal," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "She sat there with her pearls and her tears and told millions of people that I manipulated your entire family, that I orchestrated financial fraud, that I was the villain in this story. And you, Sebastian, you released a statement supporting her version. You made me the monster." "I know," Sebastian said quietly, "and I will never be able to apologize enough for that. But Maya, my mother is playing a game she's been playing for 30 years. She's vicious and strategic, and she identified you as the perfect scapegoat the moment the investigation became public. If I had defended you, if I had contradicted her narrative, she would have known immediately that we were working together." Maya whirled around from the window. "We weren't working together. You used me without my knowledge, then divorced me without explanation, then let your family destroy my reputation. That's not teamwork, Sebastian, that's betrayal." "You're right again," he said, and the weariness in his voice was so profound that Maya felt something in her chest tighten despite her anger. "I should have trusted you from the beginning. I should have told you what my family was, what I was planning, what role I'd created for you in bringing them down. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you innocent, but all I did was make you vulnerable." He looked up at her then, and Maya saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before, genuine vulnerability. "The truth is, I've been planning to destroy my family for 5 years, since the day I found out what my father did to a whistleblower who tried to expose their practices. He destroyed that man's career, his reputation, drove him to bankruptcy. And when I confronted him, my father looked me in the eye and said it was necessary for the family's protection, like ruining someone's life was just another business decision. I realized then that the empire I'd been raised to inherit was built on the suffering of people who'd gotten in the way. Maya wanted to stay angry, wanted to hold on to her rage like a shield, but Sebastian's words were chipping away at her certainty. "So you decided to take them down," she said. "Yes, but I couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't trust anyone inside the family's sphere of influence. I needed someone clean, someone with legal standing who could testify credibly if it came to that. I needed you. But you said you fell in love with me," Maya said, hating how her voice cracked on the words. Sebastian stood up slowly, and this time when he took a step toward her, Maya didn't step back. "I did," he said. "Somewhere between the calculated courtship and the wedding I staged for appearance's sake, you became the only real thing in my life. Your kindness, your intelligence, the way you saw past the money to who I could be instead of who my family made me, it broke through every defense I'd built. And that's when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake, because I couldn't love you and use you at the same time." "So what now?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've given me evidence that could destroy your family and clear my name. You've admitted you used me and that you fell in love with me. What exactly are you asking from me, Sebastian?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched the folder on the table between them. "I'm asking you to help me finish what I started. Use this evidence to work with federal investigators. Testify against my family if it comes to trial. Make sure they can't hurt anyone else ever again. I'm asking you to be my partner in bringing them down, consciously this time, with full knowledge of what we're doing and why." "And what happens to you in this scenario?" Maya asked. "Because that evidence doesn't just incriminate your family, Sebastian. Your name is all over those documents, too." "I know," he said simply. "I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from my role in the family's operations. I won't hide behind immunity deals or claim ignorance. If bringing down the Coles means I go down with them, then that's the price I pay for years of complicity." Maya studied his face, searching for any sign of manipulation or hidden agenda, but all she saw was exhaustion and honesty. "You're asking me to trust you," she said. "After everything you've done, you're asking me to believe you're different from the rest of your family." "No," Sebastian said. "I'm asking you to trust yourself. You're smart enough to verify everything in that folder, strategic enough to protect yourself while using the evidence, and strong enough to do what's right even when it's hard. I'm not asking you to trust me, Maya. I'm asking you to trust yourself to make the choice that serves justice, whatever that choice is." 2 weeks after the confrontation in Sebastian's penthouse, Maya walked up the steps of the federal courthouse with Marcus at her side and every news camera in the city trained on her face. She'd spent those 2 weeks working with Agent Sarah Chun, the lead federal investigator, turning over every piece of evidence from Sebastian's folder and explaining how she'd been manipulated into becoming an unwitting participant in the Cole family's schemes. Chun was a sharp woman with no patience for billionaire privilege, and she believed Maya's story immediately, especially once forensic accountants verified that the evidence was genuine and comprehensive. But Maya had insisted on one condition. She wanted to testify in the preliminary hearing, wanted to face the Cole family in open court and tell the truth about what they'd done, not just to her, but to everyone they'd used and discarded over the years. Marcus had argued against it, saying it was too risky, too public, too likely to backfire, but Maya was done hiding. "Ms. Cole, do you regret marrying Sebastian Cole?" a reporter shouted from the crowd. "Maya, are you testifying against your ex-husband for revenge?" another called out. "Did you know about the fraud from the beginning?" Maya ignored the questions and walked into the courthouse, through security, and into the courtroom where the preliminary hearing was being held to determine if the evidence warranted a full trial. The Cole family was already seated at the defense table with a phalanx of expensive lawyers surrounding them like a protective wall. Victoria saw Maya enter, and her cold blue eyes narrowed with hatred so pure it was almost physical. Richard leaned back in his chair with studied indifference, but Maya saw his hand clench on the armrest. Nathaniel just smirked, that same dismissive expression he'd always worn around her. Sebastian wasn't there, and Maya felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. He'd kept his word, had turned over additional evidence to investigators and offered to testify against his family. But the prosecutors had decided to use him as a witness rather than a defendant, at least initially. Maya knew the internet was divided on whether that was justice or privilege, but right now she had to focus on her own testimony. Judge Catherine Morrison entered, a stern African-American woman in her 60s who'd made her reputation prosecuting white-collar crime, and the room rose. "Be seated," she said, her voice brooking no nonsense. "We're here today to determine if the United States government has sufficient evidence to proceed with criminal charges against Victoria Cole, Richard Cole, and Nathaniel Cole for conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and related charges. Ms. Chun, call your first witness." Agent Chun stood. "The United States calls Maya Reeves Cole." Maya walked to the witness stand on steady legs, though her heart was hammering. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, and then she sat down and looked out at the courtroom, at the reporters taking notes, at the Cole family watching her with various expressions of anger and dismissal, at Marcus giving her an encouraging nod. "Ms. Cole," Agent Chin began, "can you describe your relationship with the defendants?" And Maya began to speak, her voice clear and strong in the formal courtroom. She told them about meeting Sebastian, about the whirlwind romance that had swept her from her modest consulting job into a world of private jets and designer clothes. She described the Cole family's initial coolness toward her, Victoria's barely concealed disdain, Richard's patronizing tolerance, Nathaniel's dismissive arrogance. And then she told them about the documents Sebastian had asked her to sign, her voice never wavering as she described how she'd trusted her husband completely, how he'd presented the paperwork as estate planning and family protection, how she'd signed her name to financial instruments she hadn't understood because she'd believed in his love. "Did you have any knowledge that these documents were part of a fraudulent scheme?" Chin asked. "None whatsoever," Maya said. Firmly. "I was a consultant before my marriage, but my expertise was in operational efficiency, not corporate finance or offshore banking. I signed what my husband asked me to sign because I trusted him, and because he assured me it was routine family business." Agent Chin nodded and pulled out a document. "I'm showing you what's been marked as Government Exhibit 42. Do you recognize this?" Maya looked at the paper and felt ice in her stomach despite having prepared for this moment. "Yes," she said. "That's an email from Victoria Cole to Richard Cole, dated 6 months before my wedding to Sebastian, discussing the need for, quote, and clean external signatory who won't understand the full scope of overseas operations." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The defense attorney, a silver-haired shark named Bennett, shot to his feet. "Objection. That document hasn't been authenticated, and it's hearsay." Judge Morrison looked at Agent Chin. Response. "Your Honor, this email was recovered from Victoria Cole's personal server during the execution of a federal search warrant. It's been verified by forensic analysis, and we have multiple similar communications showing premeditation of using Ms. Cole as an unwitting participant in the defendant's schemes. It directly contradicts their claim that Maya Cole was the mastermind of the fraud." The judge nodded. "Overruled. Continue, Agent Chun." And Chun did, methodically walking Maya through document after document that painted a devastating picture. Emails showing the Cole family discussing how to manipulate Maya into signing papers. Text messages between Richard and Nathaniel joking about how trusting she was. Memo records showing Sebastian had initially suggested using Maya as a legal shield, though Chin carefully noted that Sebastian was cooperating with investigators and had provided much of this evidence himself. But it was the final document that broke Victoria's composure. Agent Chen held up a handwritten note, preserved in a plastic evidence sleeve. "Ms. Cole, do you recognize this?" Maya nodded, though seeing it again made her chest tight. "That's a note Victoria Cole sent to me the day after my wedding to Sebastian. It says, and I quote, 'Welcome to the family. I hope you understand your role is to be seen, not heard, and to sign what needs signing without asking tedious questions. We've made you rich, don't make us regret it.'" The courtroom went silent. Maya continued. "At the time, I thought she was just being her usual cold self, making it clear I wasn't really welcome. I didn't understand she was literally telling me my purpose in the family was to be a signature on documents I shouldn't question." Victoria exploded. She shot to her feet, her perfect composure finally shattering. "She's lying," she shouted, her cultured voice cracking with rage. "That little gold digger manipulated my son, wormed her way into our family, and now she's trying to destroy us with her lies. Mrs. Cole, sit down." Judge Morrison banged her gavel, but Victoria ignored her. "She was a nobody from nowhere. We gave her everything, and this is how she repays us? By fabricating evidence and playing the victim. Your Honor, I request a recess to consult with my client," Bennett said urgently, trying to pull Victoria back into her seat, but the damage was done. Judge Morrison's face was like granite. The court has seen enough, she said. Based on the evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to bind over Victoria Cole, Richard Cole, and Nathaniel Cole for trial on all charges. Bail is set at $10 million each, surrender of passports, and electronic monitoring. We're adjourned. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Maya's first instinct was to keep walking, to ignore Sebastian and get into Marcus's car and leave this whole nightmare behind. But something in his voice stopped her. Please, Sebastian said, and she'd never heard that word from him before with such raw desperation. 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes, and then I'll never ask anything of you again. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. You don't owe him anything, he said quietly. We can leave right now. But Maya had just spent 2 hours on a witness stand staring down the family that had tried to destroy her, and she wasn't afraid of a conversation in a parking garage. 5 minutes, she said, pulling away from Marcus and walking to Sebastian's car. Stay where I can see you. She opened the passenger door and slid into the seat, keeping the door slightly ajar. Up close, Sebastian looked even worse than he had in the penthouse 2 weeks ago. His suit was expensive but rumpled, his gray eyes had dark circles underneath, and his hands gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright. You did it, he said, and there was something like pride in his voice. You faced them in open court, and you destroyed their defense before the trial even started. Maya, you were magnificent. I didn't do it for you, Maya said coldly. I did it because your family tried to make me the villain in their story, and I wasn't going to let them win. I know, Sebastian said, and you have every right to hate me. But Maya, I need to tell you something before you hear it from the prosecutors, and I need you to understand why I did what I'm about to do. Something in his tone made Maya's stomach clench. What did you do, Sebastian? He took a shaky breath. I made a deal with the federal prosecutors. I'm testifying against my family in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Everything you exposed in that courtroom today, I'm going to corroborate and expand on when the trial starts. My testimony, combined with the evidence I've provided and your witness statement, will guarantee convictions. Maya stared at him. You took immunity? After you told me in your letter that you wouldn't hide behind deals, that you'd face the consequences of your complicity. I lied, Sebastian said, and the bitterness in his voice was profound. Or rather, I told you what I thought you needed to hear to get you to use the evidence I'd left you. The truth is, I'm a coward, Maya. I spent 5 years documenting my family's crimes, but when it came time to face real consequences, I took the deal that would save me. Maya felt something break inside her, the last fragile hope she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. So everything you said in the penthouse was manipulation, she said, her voice flat. The letter about falling in love with me, the speech about facing consequences, all of it was just more strategy to get me to do what you wanted. No, Sebastian said desperately. I do love you. That part was true. That's the only thing that's been true through all of this. But love doesn't make me brave, Maya. Love doesn't make me willing to go to prison for my family's sins when there's a way out. I'm weak and selfish, and exactly the kind of privileged bastard who takes a deal while others face the consequences. Your family's sins? Maya's voice rose. Sebastian, you put my name on those documents. You used me as a legal shield for years. You're not just complicit in your family's crimes. You committed crimes against me personally. I know, he shouted, and the sound was shocking in the confined space. I know what I did to you, and I know there's no apology big enough, no explanation good enough. I used you, I betrayed you, and then I took a deal that lets me walk away clean while you had to stand up in that courtroom and relive every humiliation. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what kind of man I really am before you waste any more time thinking I might be redeemable. Maya looked down at him, this man she'd loved, this man who'd destroyed her, this man who'd just admitted he was too weak to do the right thing even when he knew what the right thing was. And she felt the anger drain out of her, replaced by something colder and more final, indifference. You're right, she said quietly. You are weak and selfish, and I wasted 7 years loving someone who was never real. But Sebastian, here's the thing you don't understand. I don't need you to be redeemable. I don't need you to be brave or selfless or any of the things I used to hope you could be. I needed you to be honest, and you finally managed that, so thank you. Sebastian's hand reached toward her, but didn't touch. Maya, please. No, she interrupted. You don't get to ask me for anything else. You don't get my forgiveness, my understanding, or my pity. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. I'm going to testify at your family's trial. I'm going to make sure they face consequences for what they've done to people like me, people without power or protection. And I'm going to rebuild my life without you in it, because I deserve better than a man who loves me but won't fight for me when it matters. She started to close the car door, then paused. The divorce was the kindest thing you ever did for me, Sebastian. You just did it for all the wrong reasons. As Maya walked away with Marcus, leaving Sebastian alone in his expensive car in the underground darkness, her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chin. Victoria Cole just tried to flee the country. Arrested at JFK with fake passport. Richard and Nathaniel both trying to cut deals now. Your testimony accelerated everything. The judge wants to fast-track the trial. Are you ready? Maya looked at the message, then at Marcus, then back at the parking garage where she could see Sebastian's car still sitting in the shadows. She'd come into this courthouse as a woman fighting to clear her name. She was leaving as someone who'd brought down a billionaire dynasty and discovered that revenge, while satisfying, wasn't the same as justice. I'm ready, she typed back to Chin. And she was. She was ready to testify, ready to watch the Cole family face consequences, ready to move forward with her life. But most importantly, she was ready to become whoever she was meant to be when she wasn't defined by Sebastian Cole's betrayal or the role his family had tried to force her into. The woman walking out of that parking garage into the Manhattan sunlight wasn't the naive consultant who'd fallen for a billionaire's calculated romance. She wasn't the humiliated wife who'd been divorced in front of an audience. She was Maya Reeves, and she was done being anyone's victim or anyone's weapon. She was ready to be her own person, whatever that meant. 6 months after the Cole family trial ended with guilty verdicts on all counts, Maya Reeves sat in her new office overlooking the Brooklyn waterfront and reviewed a contract that would make her company one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in New York. She'd started Reeves Consulting 3 months after the trial, using her sudden notoriety not as a burden, but as a calling card. Companies that wanted to clean up their corporate practices, that wanted someone with integrity who understood how easy it was for good people to be used by corrupt systems, they came to her. And Maya built a team of brilliant consultants who'd been overlooked or underestimated by traditional firms, people who'd faced their own versions of what she'd survived. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Victoria Cole sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Richard Cole receives 12 years. Nathaniel Cole gets 10 years for cooperation. Maya read the article with satisfaction, but no joy. The trial had been brutal. 6 weeks of testimony and evidence that laid bare every ugly secret the Cole family had tried to hide. Victoria had maintained her innocence to the end, actually believing that her tears and her pedigree would save her. Richard had tried to blame everyone but himself. Only Nathaniel had shown any real remorse, though it came too late to matter. Sebastian had kept his immunity deal, had testified against his family as promised, and had walked out of the courtroom a free man. Maya hadn't spoken to him since the parking garage, hadn't responded to the letters his lawyers sent, hadn't acknowledged the donation he'd made to her company that she'd immediately returned. She'd read in the business press that he'd stepped down from Cole Technologies, that he'd started a foundation focused on corporate ethics and whistleblower protection, that he was trying to atone for his family's sins and his own complicity. But Maya didn't care about Sebastian's redemption arc. He'd made his choices, and she'd made hers, and they were no longer part of each other's stories. Maya, her assistant, a sharp young woman named Jordan, knocked on the glass door. Marcus Webb is here for your lunch meeting. Maya smiled. Marcus had become more than her lawyer over the past year. He'd become a genuine friend and mentor, one of the few people who'd seen her at her lowest and never doubted she'd rise again. Send him in, she said, and when Marcus entered with his familiar kind expression behind those rimless glasses, Maya felt a surge of gratitude for the people who'd stood by her when everything fell apart. You're doing incredibly well, Marcus said over sandwiches and coffee. The business press is calling you the most ethical consultant in New York, which given your history is either ironic or poetic. Maya laughed. I'm going with poetic. Nothing like being framed for financial fraud to make you passionate about corporate integrity. Speaking of which, Marcus said carefully, I got a call from Sebastian Cole's attorney yesterday. He wanted to know if you'd be willing to meet with Sebastian. Apparently, he has something he wants to say to you in person. Maya's smile faded slightly. No, she said firmly. Whatever Sebastian wants to say, he can write it in a letter I won't read. I meant what I told him in that parking garage, Marcus. I'm done being part of his story. Marcus nodded. I told his lawyer the same thing. But Maya, for what it's worth, I think he genuinely regrets how everything happened. The foundation he started has already helped 3 whistleblowers get protection and legal support. He's directing his money toward fixing some of the damage his family caused. Good for him, Maya said, and she meant it without sarcasm. I hope he does good things with his privilege and his resources. But his redemption isn't my responsibility, and his regret doesn't change what he did to me. That evening, Maya stood in her office watching the sun set over Manhattan, the city that had witnessed her destruction and her rebuilding. She thought about the woman she'd been when she'd first met Sebastian Cole, eager and naive, believing that love and trust were enough to bridge any gap. She thought about the woman she'd been in that Cole estate family meeting, humiliated and devastated, her world disintegrating in front of an audience. And she looked at who she'd become, a successful businesswoman, advocate for corporate ethics, someone who'd turned her own victimization into a mission to help others avoid the same fate. Her phone buzzed with an email from a potential client, a mid-level executive at a Fortune 500 company who suspected her superiors were using her as a shield for questionable practices. Maya read the email and felt that familiar surge of purpose. This was why she'd built Reeves Consulting. This was why she'd fought so hard to clear her name and tell her truth. Not for revenge, though that had been satisfying, but to be in a position to help people who were where she'd been, used, manipulated, and blamed for crimes they didn't understand they were committing. She typed a response immediately. I understand what you're going through, and I can help. Let's talk tomorrow. A year after the divorce that was supposed to destroy her, Maya Reeves had done what the Cole family never expected. She'd won. Not by becoming like them, not by using their tactics or their ruthlessness, but by refusing to let their betrayal define her future. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turned it into the foundation of something meaningful. And the billionaire husband who'd called for a divorce after that family meeting, who'd planned so carefully to use her and then discard her. He was free but alone, wealthy but purposeless, immune from prosecution but not from the consequences of his choices. Sebastian Cole had saved himself legally, but he'd lost the only real thing he'd ever had in his life, and no amount of foundation work or public redemption could change that. As for Maya, she raised her glass to her reflection in the window, to the woman who'd survived, who'd fought back, who'd built something beautiful from the ruins of betrayal. Here's to new beginnings, she said to the empty office, to the city spread out before her, to the life she'd created on her own terms. The divorce had been meant to end her story, but instead, it had been the beginning of everything that mattered. And that was the greatest revenge of all. Not destroying the people who'd hurt her, but becoming someone they could never touch, never diminish, never use again. Maya Reeves was free, and she was just getting started. So what really happened after the billionaire called for a divorce? The victim became a victor, the wife became a whistleblower, and the woman everyone underestimated became the one person the Cole family should have feared most. What's your biggest takeaway from Maya's story? Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after a betrayal? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe in second chances that you create for yourself, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to stay down when life knocked them over. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful that your enemies become irrelevant. This is Maya Reeves' story, and it's proof that the person who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous person in any room. Thanks for following this journey, and remember, you're stronger than anyone who ever tried to break you.